So my name's Wen, and thank you so much for joining us for the kickoff session for this week. We actually had our official kickoff last Friday, and it was a really great session, and I hope everyone enjoyed it and you're back today again. So today we have an amazing lineup of panelists, but before I go into that, just for the people who aren't familiar with TBN, we're an organization all about fighting poverty through enterprise. We really believe in an ecosystems approach to support social entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia. And our key values are collaboration, empowerment, dignity, hope, and restoration. And we're so glad to be really collaborating with such amazing panelists this week. And we really do believe in collaboration, as can be seen later on by our sponsors as well. So when we talk about an ecosystems approach, we have kind of 5 pillars or prongs that we do this by. So one of the first is conference and events, which is what we're in now. And usually we would have this conference in person, which actually was meant to be in August in Kuala Lumpur. We have an expertise network, which is really skills-based volunteering, getting professionals with their professional skill sets to volunteer to help social entrepreneurs and founders. We have a social enterprise training hub, short form SET, and we just had our first cohort, which is just finishing up, and I believe 2 of them are pitching later this week. So really exciting to hear of these new startups. We have an investors club, which is basically people who are interested in impact investing. And so that will be officially launched in June, July this year. So just keep your eyes peeled for this. And lastly, the resilience program. So the resilience program is something that has just literally been set up as a response to helping social enterprises through the pandemic. And the funds that for your tickets and for the sponsorship money are all going to this resilience program. So the money will be given out by 2 ways. So number 1 is targeted grants. And the second one is the resilience fund itself, which is a debt financing at very inclusive and low rates. Currently, we're working with partners in Malaysia and Indonesia to set this up. But if you are outside of these 2 countries, we will be happy to, and where it works, to matchmake. So if you run it as a founder, as a social enterprise looking for help, and we find the right funder, we will try our best to matchmake you. So there's more on this coming up later this week on Wednesday morning, where Alex, my colleague, will be speaking more about this. But if you have any queries, you can email through at resilience@tbn.asia. So all this wouldn't happen without our amazing sponsors, which you can see on this slide. So thank you so much. And all the sponsorship money, like I said, will go to the resilience program too. So before I hand this over to Christy Davis, our moderator for today, just 2 very quick poll questions. We want to know where you're dialing in from, and also what industry do you represent and what do you work in? So we just want to see the array of people dialing in. So it will literally take you 2 seconds. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce Christy Davis. So Christy is actually on the board of TBNAsia. And she's also the Executive Director at the Lien Center for Social Innovation at Singapore Management University, SMU. So we have a massive panel today, so I'm going to give it to her without any further ado. So Christy, over to you.
Thank you, Wen, and good morning, everyone. I'm just kind of pretending I can see all of this, the sea of faces out there. It's very exciting. We're so happy you're with us. First of all, for all of you celebrating a very warm Selamat Hari Raya. We know that it's a holiday season. So we kicked off this first virtual conference for TBNAsia last Friday evening with an in-depth discussion on why we need social enterprises more than ever. It was quite a compelling discussion. We start this week we've got a very diverse schedule of sessions actually, but we're going to explore the big picture. It seems like a very good place to start, kind of looking at the overall context in which we are currently find ourselves. During this time of crisis, what do we see happening at that macro level? What are the effects of COVID-19 on social enterprises and the social impact ecosystem? So to explore this topic over the next hour, I'm thrilled to present a panel that represents very different vantage points And it's wonderful because it's a 3P panel. 3P meaning we've got panelists from the public sector, government, from the private sector, business, and from the people sector, the social sector, the not-for-profit sector. So very quickly, you saw their faces really quickly come up, but introducing our panelists. The first is going to be Eugenia Ko. She is the head of sustainable investing and investment and engagement strategy, sustainable investing and engagement strategy of the private bank and wealth management at Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you, Eugenia. Second up will be Tristan Ace, who's the global lead for partnerships, development, and social enterprises at the British Council. He's based in Hong Kong. We have Dr. Elizabeth Lee, the CEO of Sunway Education Group. We have Stephanie Kimber, who's the director of the Innovation Exchange at Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT. And we have Zulaira Abu Bakar, the CEO of the Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center, or MAGIC. And we're hoping she's been having a little bit of Wi-Fi difficulty, so we're really hoping that she is able to join us as well. So each member of the panel will share a little bit about their respective organizations and the current state of the society, social impact ecosystem given COVID-19, kind of what they see from their different vantage points across the different sectors. And actually with that, I'll just turn it right over to Eugenia to get us started. Eugenia, please.
Great, thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. This is Eugenia from Standard Chartered, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with Standard Chartered, so I wouldn't go too much into detail on what we do, but just a couple of pieces which you might be interested in regarding our commitments to sustainable finance. So out in February this year, we've committed to financing 75 billion worth of projects for over the next few years to really try to drive sustainable development in a number of areas, including that of renewables, clean energy, and also sustainable infrastructure. Most recently around COVID, we launched a $1 billion COVID financing fund. So for companies that are looking to aid the fight in COVID, especially in the healthcare sector, that's what we're funding, because we acknowledge that capital is also pretty tight during these times. And on the more social side, our foundation has launched a 50 million fund to really help charities and communities that are struggling as a result of COVID. So plenty that's being done out there to support the ecosystem, and hopefully, you know, we can all do our part in this area. What are we seeing more broadly? I think, you know, what would be interesting would be for me to just give a couple of points around the macro landscape. As everyone knows, social enterprises sit within this ecosystem of sustainable investing. And so what are we seeing in the sustainable investing space? I think if you look at sustainable investing, one of the key questions in many investors' minds has been, will sustainable investing actually survive this period of time, given that a lot of sustainable investing momentum has actually taken place during bull markets. And as we're going into more difficult markets, many have been wondering whether either ESG investing, which is within the realm of sustainable investing, will make it, or will we see investors flow money out of them. I think the good news is we see that there has been early resilience in a lot of the ESG or sustainable investing funds. So if you look at a number of the research reports out there, most recently by some of the big asset managers and also by Morningstar, we actually see encouraging signs of momentum. So with Morningstar, in one of the reports that they ran, they actually found that more than half of sustainable investing strategies or ethical funds actually outperform the MSCI World. And more, you know, as we speak to investors that are thinking about the space, having deep reflections around COVID, they're starting to think about it a bit more. Within the ESG and sustainable investing space, I think we see a couple more topics come into play. While investors previously perhaps were interested a lot more on the governance aspect of it, and they still are, but increasingly the focus has shifted also into the social aspects. So the S of ESG. So looking at, you know, employee welfare policies, looking at supply chains and the strength of supply chains. These are conversations that investors are really thinking about But overall, I think it's encouraging that at least the big investors are seeing that there's been some proof in these ESG strategies, and there's a commitment to do a lot more in the space. And it trickles down, I guess, to social enterprises and, the conversations that you have, the resilience that you can show, and also the areas that is our focus for you. So I'll end with that, and then I'll hand the time over to the next panelist, because I'm sure we'll have more time for questions later.
Great. Eugenia, thank you so much. Tristan, we're going to go over to you, the British Council. I know you've done quite a regional survey on social enterprises. Why don't you share a little bit more, please?
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks, Christy. Great to be here. So the British Council, like TBN, has adopted an ecosystem approach to how we've supported the development of this social impact economy. Everything from the very first social investment platform in China, going back to 2013, to our support for small and medium-sized enterprises in Myanmar. Indeed, that was a partnership with Standard Chartered in Myanmar, to research and policy, which is what I'll focus on for the next few minutes or so. So that piece of work is part of a global set of social enterprise landscape surveys that we launched back in 2013. And across Southeast Asia, we have surveys in Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, with surveys ongoing in Thailand and Singapore, but paused somewhat because of COVID. They actually started before the COVID crisis, but they're ongoing. So we are due to have those results hopefully by the end of the year. The reason for those surveys was really to understand some of the quantitative data and information that was lacking lacking around social enterprises. Nobody actually knew what was their contribution to economies, how many, what was the sort of the demographic of the leadership, what was their average turnover, what were their financing constraints. And so we started to build up a picture, both regionally and globally, before COVID, of what that looked like. So I'll start just perhaps drawing on some of those trends that we were seeing. And at the end, I might say a few things about what the current context is telling us and what some of the insights we're learning at the moment. I mean, we are planning to do a global social enterprise COVID response survey with our partners at the UN ESCAP, and hopefully that information will be with us within the next few months. So the key trends that we witnessed, and I think are particularly relevant for today's conversation. The first was that the vast majority of social enterprises across Southeast Asia are led by young people. That was something that was consistent across all countries. The average age was under 35 years old. So this shows that this is a young, dynamic movement. The second is the recent growth that we have witnessed. So we've seen almost exponential growth in social enterprises, particularly within the last 5 years. And what's really interesting is if you compare social enterprises that have started in the last 5 years compared to ones that perhaps started 10 or 15 years ago, you see the models, the organizational business models shift too. So more recent social enterprises are taking on for-profit legal forms, which again, I think coincides with the growth of impact investing and the desire to raise capital as opposed to be reliant or perhaps having a mix of grant capital as well. So that's a really interesting question when it comes to thinking about resilience, and I want to talk a little bit about that at the end. The third trend, I think, is the women leadership that we're seeing in social enterprises across the region. Again, you see much higher numbers of women leading social enterprises than you do in the broader economy, in the broader SME sector. So it seems that social enterprises are a good way to support increasing numbers of women into leadership roles within business. And then I think the next trend, which I think is really interesting, particularly given the current crisis, was the rate of innovation that we see within social enterprise as compared to the mainstream economy. So in some contexts, we're actually seeing, when we ask the question, have you developed a new product or service in the last 12 months? We actually found that social enterprises had a higher prevalence of new products and services than SMEs did. in some of the markets we surveyed. Now, this is really interesting, and in some respects it kind of makes sense, because you would expect that there would be a need for new products and services when you consider some of the challenges that are being faced, and the need therefore to innovate and find new ways to address them. But equally, I think it's important given the current context, and we've seen a lot of adaptation and pivoting by social enterprises across the region in addressing the COVID crisis. So it shows that they are nimble, it shows that they are able to adapt and evolve, which I think is a really good and positive sign in terms of how social enterprises might support and support at the moment during this crisis. In terms of some of them, perhaps things that we need to look at and the challenges and obstacles that we face, well, we still find that there are many small businesses, that they are fragile, and that there's still this big issue of capital, which was the #1 constraint faced by all social enterprises that we surveyed. So that's a very brief snapshot of what we're seeing. I'm looking at I set my timer for myself. I'm at 4 minutes 45. So I'm just going to say 2 things then to finish off about the specifics of now. I think that's really interesting when we think about, we talk about social enterprises, and perhaps when we use the term, we assume that they are all, well, we may not, but we think that there's one thing that we call a social enterprise. And of course, it's important to remember that there's a huge diversity of organizational forms. Some take non-profit forms, some will take for-profit forms, and I think that's really important to remember when it comes to the policy response, because a lot of social enterprises we find are slipping through the cracks in terms of the types of support that is on offer to, say, SMEs on the one hand or charities on the other. You find social enterprises don't really know where they fit within those support packages. And indeed, that's what we've seen in the UK as well, drawing on my experiences from the UK, is that social enterprises found it difficult to access the government support packages because they weren't quite sure where they fit within the system. So I think there's a real desire need for governments to really reflect on how they can ensure that these businesses don't fall through the cracks, and donors as well, and be a bit flexible about the support that they offer. And then the other thing that I think I would say is around the resilience of these businesses, and the types of models that we're finding are more resilient. And what's interesting here is something about ownership, which is important, and what we're potential, and this is very emerging. So I mean, I don't think we can say this with any great certainty, but one thing that I think is quite interesting is that the models that we find are more resilient are ones that are owned and governed in the interest of or by communities. And we find that community ownership can play an important role in building more resilient businesses. However, of course, then that leads to a tension, which perhaps we can discuss on the panel, which is, well, that makes it more difficult for those enterprises to raise capital and to scale. So so how do you balance those two things? I think is a really interesting question to reflect on.
Thank you, Tristan. Fascinating. So I'm glad that we have public sector, but it's great we have government represented here. So Stephanie perhaps can chat about that in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth from the Sunway Group. Elizabeth, please.
Thank you, Christy. It's scary to even imagine that half of the global workforce, or as many as 1.6 billion people, are in immediate danger of having their livelihoods destroyed by the economic impact of COVID. Now, this is some figures that we got, which is according to the International Labour Organization. And our Malaysian Institute of Economic Research forecasts that as many as 2.4 million people may lose their jobs in this country. That's just how bad it is. So while in terms of infectivity and mortality, this virus does not seem to discriminate. It appears that in terms of its social economic impact, the pandemic discriminates against the least protected, resource skilled, and of course, educated. Let me elaborate. As we grapple with the acute and chronic socio-economic impact of COVID pandemic and the so-called flattening of the curve strategies, it appears that the American writer and futurist Alvin Toffler, that we all have heard of, that he had this prediction, and he said, and let me just quote you, let me just look for it. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. It's one of my favorite phrases because I think that it's so appropriate at this time. This is where the quality and relevant education can play a critical role in aiding social enterprises to adapt quickly in the face of a crisis. How often we hear of COVID idiots, right? Who refuse to socially distance themselves and even attack those who wear masks. They are not necessarily uneducated, but they just have not learned. And as the largest education-focused social enterprise in Malaysia, the Sunway Education Group, which is owned and governed by the Jeffrey Chia Foundation, we provide world-class quality education, if I dare to pitch it at that level, that is accessible and equitably available. So in fact, the various economic downturns or crises over the last 3 decades have actually helped us evolve our philosophy and our corporate DNA. Let me just tell you a little bit more. While we continue to evolve to ensure our own business sustainability and social contact and impact, the Sunway Education Group realizes that we need to do our part in supporting many social enterprises which are doing such amazing work, but may not have the training nor the experience to capitalize on how business behaviors are being reshaped and how human socialization and consumer activities are shifting dramatically to online platforms. For example, at Sunway, through our innovation labs and the Alibaba Global E-commerce Talent Program, we organized the E-commerce Jumpstart Program to assist small, medium enterprises understand, survive, and capitalize on the current challenges and opportunities by establishing an online presence. This initiative has received tremendous support by many partners, including our Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation, known as MDEC, and of course Magic. Zulera is here with us today. And I have hoped for our community's resilience and desire to upskill, as more than 1,600 participants actually registered for this program in such a short period. And finally, we need to constantly remind ourselves of our true purpose and the leadership role that we have to assume in times of crisis. For example, Sunway University, as the Asian hub of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or the UN SDN, will be rolling out various education policies and research initiatives to advance the sustainability agenda in the continent. And as drivers of the economic and social impact, it is incumbent that we drive the changes needed in the new normal to ensure that our new normal is one that is humane and sustainable, which I'm sure all of us here in this conference can relate to. So as the moral and social philosopher Eric Hoffer once said, and I quote, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." So thank you. That's exactly 5 minutes. And let me stop right here.
It's a fantastic quote to end to close on. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much. Oh, fascinating. So next up, we can't unfortunately see her face due to technology constraints, but it's such a pleasure to welcome Zulera, so from Magic. So can you hear us okay? Zulera.
Hi, Christy, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, everyone.
Please, Zulera, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. But before that, I really have to apologize. This morning, I've just been facing technical glitch. I've been trying to log on since 8:45. So my deepest apologies for that. And I'm sorry my video isn't coming up. So I don't know what's happening. So I'll just jump in straight into introducing what we do. And I actually missed a bit of the discussion in the beginning because, again, my line is very patchy. But I'll pick up wherever is possible. So we're speaking about social entrepreneurship, social impact. We're talking about the entire ecosystem, which it's very close to us. It's very close to our heart at Magic. You know, our DNA, Magic, the Malaysian Global Innovation and Creativity Center, the DNA is really about creativity and innovation. So what we do is with that core, we try and infuse that into a social entrepreneurship ecosystem. And because we have actually developed and we've actually worked with many social enterprises, and we believe that, you know, that's potentially the most sustainable business method moving forward, right? Because you're also impacting the community, but at the same time generating income for the business. I mean, simply put. So we're definitely very, very supportive of this business model. In fact, we've even come up with sort of structured ways into helping these social enterprises. So we've launched something called the Social Enterprise Accreditation Program, which actually allows some form of identity for these social enterprises. Because we believe when you have something to identify yourselves to, it's easier for targeted assistance or targeted interventions to be given to social enterprises. And that's on the basis that it is an important institution that we are looking to build. And in fact, we actually treat them like any other business. And from a creativity and an innovation perspective, now we're looking at it from a social innovation perspective. So we think that social enterprises is really a method of achieving this bigger goal of innovating the social space. You know, how do we allow technology and innovation to really improve the social state? Because we also believe in the power of collaboration and partnerships at Magic. I think part of what we do, or a big part that we emphasize on, is collaboration and partnership. We capacity build, we provide necessary training, and we provide necessary foundations, but I think more than anything else is really the collaboration that we emphasize on. Hence, you know, the point that I'm the very reason I'm even here today, right? It's because we value this sort of collaboration, and we think it is important to bring everyone together, right? Everyone's got a different way of looking at things, and it's important that we bring everyone together. And going back to the point that we actually treat SEs like any other businesses, we actually carried out a survey, you know. And again, going back to what Elizabeth mentioned earlier, COVID has hit us very hard. And businesses and SEs, just like any other business, are not isolated from the situation. They've been badly hit. What we did was when the movement control order was launched, was initiated in March, we actually carried out a survey. And in that survey, the numbers was quite staggering. We had about 40% of our startups and SEs who weren't able to sustain past 2 months, you know. And that was a very scary indication of the state of the businesses, right? As we said, because we treat them like any other businesses, and 40 odd % of them were, you know, were facing the risk of being shut down. And only about close to 3% actually were even confident of surviving past 12 months. So that left us in a state of frenzy, in a sense that, oh, what do we do to help these SEs out, particularly if we're speaking about SEs today? So we were thinking about what else that can be done. How else can we actually help them look at a different business model, given that they are already doing good work within the particular ecosystem, you know, because they're already working with the target beneficiaries. How do we actually, you know, turn the business model around in order for them to continue to deliver the same impact to the target beneficiary, but at the same time allow them to sustain as a business? So we were quite fortunate. We had some SEs who really found this crisis as a way to turn the business around. And I mean, in a more technical term, we call it as pivot. You know, they managed to actually turn the business model around and find ways to respond very quickly. I think very quickly, before, you know, I end my 5 minutes, I like to take example of a couple of SEs that actually responded very quickly. So some of them, like BG, I don't know if they're on the call today, you know, they even very quickly worked with their partners and made face shields, right? Face shields, isolation boxes, and supplied to all of the frontliners. Even, and some of them actually even started creating and manufacturing PPEs as well as face masks for all of these frontliners. And we also had another social enterprise called Masala Wheels. They've been really great during this period, is that they've actually set up some form of a donation drive which would allow food to be delivered to the frontliners and homes that are badly affected due to COVID. So the thing is this, right? What's very encouraging about the social entrepreneurship model, if I can encapsulate, is that the very fact that they operate within that target area or that target beneficiary allows them to respond very quickly, given their business model, that they're very agile, that they're very small in size, and I mean, simply put, the heart is in the right place, so they're able to respond very, very quickly when crisis hits. But at the same time, they're also generating income. So I think it's a fantastic business model, right?
Terrific.
So yeah, that's from me. Thanks, Christy.
Oh no, wonderful practical examples. That's wonderful, Zalira. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Last but definitely not least, Stephanie, calling in from Australia. Stephanie, give us that public sector perspective, please.
Hi, thanks, Christy. It's always daunting to be last, but I think we gradually got closer and closer down to the social entrepreneurs, and so I'm going to raise it right back up again to the government level and just give you a little bit of an overview of the Australian government response, but then quite quickly get down to the responses from some of our programs. So Australia has a $4 billion aid program, and the COVID sort of hit right at the end of our financial year. Financial year for us is the end of June. And so whatever we had left unspent, we've kind of been busily refocusing that on immediate needs. So much of our immediate response has been around health security. And this is, we have a focus on the Indo-Pacific, that's like writ large sort of countries around the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, but with a very close focus on Southeast Asia as one of our important regional partners, and the Pacific Islands. So much of our response to date as an overall aid program has been health security to Timor-Leste and the Pacific Islands, and then some of our larger programs and important partners like Indonesia. What's been really interesting from a government bureaucracy is how meeting this challenge has changed the way that we're working inside the government. In DFAT, we often do a lot of writing cables, writing reporting, doing briefing, and suddenly there's this desire for data. And I think it's really great to be able to get data and try and present that to senior officials in a more compelling way. So that's part of our team. I lead the Innovation Exchange, which is a unit within DFAT. So we've been leading this drive for better use of data and visualization. So what the Australian Aid Program is planning to do is a sort of 2-year COVID response strategy that's kind of being finalised now. There'll be a public release of that shortly by our Foreign Minister. And it focuses on 3 main categories: health security, regional stability, and economic resilience, with a mainstreaming of, intense focus on women's economic empowerment, gender equality, and including persons living with a disability. So I'll race back like straight down to the economic response, because I think that's what most people signing into this webinar will be interested in. And we expect that next financial year, so from July onwards, we'll have more announcements to make about the economic response, the medium term, the longer term response to this crisis. Right now, what we've been able to do is work with our existing partners and existing programs to try and help protect the social impact that we've already invested in. Similar to what Zalira was saying about from Magic, and wow, these social entrepreneurs are really struggling. Even the businesses that work with them, incubators, accelerators, financial intermediaries. We're getting, you know, a lot of response back from the field that people don't know whether they're going to survive the next 3 months or the next 6 months. So one of my programs we run from the Innovation Exchange, Scaling Frontier Innovation, which has over the years focused on innovators, on incubators and accelerators, and on financial intermediaries. Our financial intermediary program, Frontier Brokers, and I saw someone from Good Return signed into the webinar, so that's great. They are actually continuing their work as normal, but having to make changes and be more flexible around repayments, or, you know, can they go out and do due diligence on these entrepreneurs while everybody's stuck at home? So that we expect that maybe the money that they will be able to direct towards social entrepreneurs may be just a little bit delayed, as investors are being a little more cautious. But what's been really great is that all of our partners from the incubator program, we were just about to launch into a brand new design for how we would support enterprise support organizations across Southeast Asia and the Pacific when COVID hit. So instead of doing this big design and then waiting for any results or any new programming, our partners have been super flexible, and we are now doing 2 mini designs, one focused on the Pacific, one focused on Southeast Asia, which will be a mix of needs assessment, thinking about what the future program could be, but also providing some sort of emergency, it might be money, may not be, but it could be technical assistance. We have heard that a lot of our incubators and entrepreneurs are interested to know how they can do that pivot, like Magic was talking about. One of our entrepreneurs, I've gone 5.5 minutes, I'll wrap it up. One of our entrepreneurs based in Vanuatu have been sewing community-led groups of sewers making menstrual hygiene products and incontinence pads, and they've just immediately started making masks. I mean, that's a no-brainer, and they've been able to keep their products going and to keep the sort of make a new business line for themselves within Vanuatu. So I've got so much more to say, but I think I'll stop there and pass it back to Christy.
Thank you, Stephanie. I know we're not going to have enough time. I think that's already just very clear. So it's very interesting. So everybody, I mean, I think everyone, as we circle back around, regardless of your vantage point, we're talking about resilience. We're talking about the ability to adapt to a very quick changing environment, and how can that happen? So I want to pick up on resilience. Several of you mentioned it very specifically, especially Tristan. But you know, we talk about the power and the importance of purpose-driven businesses. I think there was somebody mentioned that more than just kind of a nonprofit social enterprise model, it's actually purpose-driven business, even if you're small. So if we're witnessing issues of resilience, we see the successes of social enterprises, but also this fragility. So the question is, are social enterprises really an answer for the future of sustainability? You know, and it's kind of a provocative question, but I'd love to toss it out there. Is this a model that's actually, is this workable? If we look at what's happening, what we're needing to do to help shore up and help these enterprises thrive and survive, is this the right model? Any takers on that question?
Christy, I just wanted to be equally provocative back and say it's not only social enterprises that are requesting a lot of support. We've seen, you know, aviation industries, oil industries, you know, there is no industry, or almost no industry, that hasn't been impacted by COVID-19. And I think I really wanted to just very quickly pick up on what Tristan and Zalira said about building innovation ecosystems. And I think this work about building the ecosystem around social entrepreneurs is still quite nascent. And so, you know, if COVID hadn't hit, perhaps, or, you know, if we had a pandemic or an economic crisis in a year's time or 2 years' time, maybe they would be, the system supporting them and themselves would have been more resilient and more robust. But I'll throw it open to the rest of the
Great. So I think Tristan's dying to get a word in here. So Tristan.
So, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that I'll just reiterate the point I made earlier, which is that social enterprises are not, they come in all shapes and sizes and organizational forms. And so some have models which are very resilient and others less so. I think the question is whether businesses that prioritize the creation of social value as opposed to prioritizing profit maximization are more resilient and are the future of sustainability. In answer to that, I would say absolutely, yes. It's clear that businesses that are much more connected and rooted in their communities, that are valued by their beneficiaries and customers, that really have a place and a stake in their communities are likely to be more sustainable than ones that don't. They're likely to be more responsive. Indeed, that would be the theory. So I think and I think when we use the term social enterprise, of course, this is an incredibly messy landscape, and this term means different things to different people in different places, and we're also seeing the sort of growth of all these other terms which are sort of similar but different. So we use the term purpose-driven business, or impact enterprise, or social business, or inclusive business, or responsible business. And again, it's a very messy world of these different organizational forms. But simply put, businesses that prioritize or that place the primary purpose of their reason for existence is the creation of social impact, I think indeed are the future. And I think, I mean, one example that springs to mind, which goes back to the previous financial crisis, was that when you looked at the collapse of the banking system in the UK, the one bank in the UK that lent 80%, that was responsible for lending of all lending to 80% of SMEs in the UK, was a building society nationwide. And again, it shows a bank that was actually rooted in the community and owned by its members was the most resilient. And I think so. Again, this again comes back to the point I made earlier around the ownership and how important that is for resilience. And it does, I think, raise some really interesting questions again around the financing needs and whether or not we have the appropriate financing needs, financing models in place for these enterprises as well. So I'd be keen to hear from other panelists on, particularly on the financing question, whether we think the financing needs are appropriate at the moment.
So, Christy, if I can just jump in very quickly, just to add on to, hello.
Right?
Hi. Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I don't have my video on, so you can't tell whether I'm talking or not.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So just to sort of jump into what Tristan mentioned earlier, he brought up the point about social value. And that's a very core component of what we're talking about today. And it goes back to the point of resilience, which I want to bring up. Now, if you're speaking of business resilience, capital is a very important component to any entity, whether it's a social enterprise or whether it's a profit-driven business. Capital is a very important component. And what we've seen is that these businesses were hit very badly as far as capital is concerned with COVID-19. So the fact that I think what we need to take away moving forward is that there needs to be a fine balance between creating social value and generating capital, because social value alone cannot sustain, and you cannot create a resilient entity that's actually focusing on social values if you cannot emphasize or you cannot bring in the importance of generating capital. So financing is a very, very important topic as far as, creating social value. And it goes back to the message that we've been trying to drive to a lot of the businesses that come through our system, is that, look, I think there needs to be an intersection. I think now more than ever, we need to come to a point to say that we need to generate more businesses that have a good intersection between creating social values as well as generating capital and profits. Right? So you can't no longer operate as businesses that are just profit driven without social values. Then you become irrelevant in the future. So I think businesses that are relevant moving forward are businesses that intersect very, very carefully and very, very clearly.
Beautiful. Actually, I'm going to throw it to Eugenia with that. Eugenia, Standard Chartered Bank, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think I was going to echo that as well. I mean,
Yeah.
when we meet with a range of social enterprises, what we tell them as well is that, you know, you need to think about it in terms of the twin pillars, not just social impact, but also financial impact. And if you think about it from an investor lens, investors, if you're getting it from their investment pot, then you have to show financial sustainability. There is no way around it unless you're getting it from their philanthropic pot. Then, you know, you could say, look, you know, we are focusing on social impact. So I think one thing that would be helpful for investors when they're being pitched to from social enterprises is to really understand which pot of money they're going after. Are they going after, you know, the investment pot, or are they going after the philanthropic pot? And the clearer you are about it, the more effective those conversations will be. It's linked a lot as well to investor expectations, because if you don't set those expectations right from the start, it could lead to investor disappointment, and it only spirals downhill from there. We did an investor survey during this period of time where COVID was happening, asking a broad range of questions around impact, around appetite towards, you know, sustainable investments more broadly, of which, you know, investing in impact investments or social entrepreneurs would be included in there. And what's interesting is we found that the term kind of ambition, or, you know, having ambitious projects is actually losing its resonance. And more investors are looking for specific wins, you know, against general programs and against general impact. You know, they're looking for projects or businesses that have strong, achievable, measurable outcomes and that can deliver tangible results, both on the financial side as well as the social impact side. And so I think, you know, the clarity of that would be important to unlock some of the financing. In terms of financing, there are a wide range of financing, I think, channels. More and more we see the family offices really wanting to contribute towards the space. And I would say that they would be a right place to start for a number of impact funds and also social entrepreneurs, because they have the leeway to be able to be flexible as well, as long as it gets as long as it's aligned to their investment thesis, compared to, you know, big banks like ourselves. While sometimes the platforms and the systems and just the due diligence that's in place may not allow that kind of speed of onboarding, or the size may not be as appropriate for getting upon the platform. So it's probably a range depending on where you are within the spectrum of size as a social entrepreneurship project.
It's really interesting. So actually, I just want to toss it to Stephanie, because if we look at talking about expectations, how are your expectations from a government perspective? Are your expectations changing as a result of this? Would you agree kind of with the approach the private sector, how they're kind of evolving moving forward? You know, I'm just thinking about Eugenia's use of the word ambition. Are you looking for ambition in the organizations that you support?
Sure, and I think as a donor, in some ways we have, like family offices, quite a lot of flexibility to direct our funds in whichever way we want, but we are also constrained by our due diligence processes, public money accountability, and the fact that we take a long time to get things happening. But I'd say that we are, especially from the Innovation Exchange, we always have believed that social entrepreneurs or purpose businesses are more innovative, and that they are an excellent route for scaling those social innovations that are driven by the needs of the community, like Tristan said, that are nimble and flexible, but they often struggle in access to capital. So one of the ways that we've been able to be more faster is through our partners, helping them either through a little additional funding now to direct kind of like emergency relief to those businesses. Our Investing in Women program, which focuses in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines, we approved them directing $3 million to an emergency fund that investees in their existing portfolios could apply for to help with that day-to-day operational capital, and also to help in the pivot and a little bit of TA. Christy, feel free to stop me whenever you want, because we've got.
Yeah, just go ahead and finish off, because I want to after no, go ahead and continue, Stephanie, because I want to move over to Elizabeth just to pick up from a kind of an enabling perspective. But go ahead, Stephanie, finish your thought, and then Elizabeth, I'll ask you to chime in if you would, just from that education enabler capacity builder perspective, please.
Sure, and I'll give you just one more example that might be interesting for people on the line. DFAT is a big supporter of the Global Innovation Fund. That's a multi-donor fund. They invest in social innovations that have the potential to impact millions of people living in poverty. So they have redirected both some of their processes inside of like making more speedy decisions so that they can get money out to their existing portfolio, but they're also reviewing new applications much faster that are tagged as being COVID response. So I think their online window is usually can take up to 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. They're making funding decisions within 2 weeks to try and get the money out to those people responding. Also, other people on the line, you may want to look at the Global Innovation Exchange, very confusing, similar names, but that is a global free platform that has lots of opportunities for funding, as well as lists of innovations that might be interesting to you.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for the resource, the hints on resources there. Elizabeth.
Thanks. It's very interesting listening to everyone's point of views. I don't know if social enterprises are the answer for the future of sustainability. Definitely their inclusive nature should see a more equitable society, which should promote greater peace and harmony. However, human greed has always been man's own downfall as we plunder and destroy for our own personal gain. So as an education social enterprise bent on promoting and driving the sustainable development agenda through education, we here at Sunway aim to infuse the very essence of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into our very own curriculum and our delivery. So I do believe in our youth and their willingness and ability to embrace these SDGs, as we call them, as a way of coexisting and collaborating with all walks of society and appreciating the value of diversity and the need at the same time to protect the ecosystem which sustains our very existence. Now, how can social enterprises be more resilient? Eugenia talked about the investment pot versus the philanthropic pot. I actually think social enterprises need to be, and I agree with many of you, that it needs to be a lot more innovative. The ones that have been, have grown very big. And the other thing is that they need to be a lot more competitive. It is not enough to depend on the good-heartedness of others. Social enterprises need to be recognized for their own self-worth and generate true business value and not just social impact. They need to make business sense. Do not be ashamed to make money, but don't cut corners. Give back to society so that more can benefit from the business. I mean, that's what social enterprises are all about. And that's how you maintain and sustain the ecosystem. The other thing is do good research. Understand the changing business behaviors and scenarios just as post-COVID-19 environment and transform accordingly. Using the word pivot as Zulera used it, or, but the whole idea is to transform. Do you need new skills? I would think so, definitely. You need to equip yourself with new knowledge and lots of understanding because it's so unknown and uncertain. Go back to school to relearn, as I've mentioned earlier, and equip yourselves with the new needed skills and knowledge to survive and thrive in this so-called new norm.
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you. So Tristan, from all of the research that you have, that the British Council has done over a lot of time, does that resonate with you? Any other advice, I guess, as we're all kind of putting forward some resources and thoughts for our social enterprises that are listening out there?
So piece of advice. I mean, I think what we have seen, one aspect that perhaps I didn't touch on was the work we do in supporting and working with different governments across Southeast Asia in developing policies to support social enterprises. And we've seen very much an incremental approach to that in recent years with governments perhaps introducing policies and in some cases new laws that are that are designed to promote and support social enterprises with various in a number of markets across Southeast Asia. So what was I going to say? I mean, this, as I said, this has been very much incremental. What times of crisis I think offer us is the chance to be a bit more ambitious, a bit more, and to look at how we might transform, take a more transformational approach. And we recognize that actually anything or things that we thought were impossible actually are possible, and we can lock down economies within weeks, and we can make these great big shifts. I think if anything, that's the biggest message I take from this period, is that actually we can make these quite bold decisions, and that we can pivot our enterprises, we can, and these things are possible. So that would be my one takeaway, is that we can be bold. This gives us the opportunity to be bold and transformational in how we about the future. In terms of what additional insights we're gaining from the work and the research that we've done, well, I think the key thing is to reiterate the role of innovation and the young people that are leading this movement. So innovation that we're seeing is really quite staggering, I think. And I think if we can find ways to really encourage and support that innovation, then there is some positivity that can emerge from the current period.
Thank you, Tristan. And actually that really leads, it's a nice bridge back to Zulera. There was a question, I know we don't have a lot of time for questions from the audience, but I wanted to grab one that had popped into the chat earlier, which was, how can small scale enterprise survive during this time, especially with low demand for products other than the primary products? So we've talked about be bold, be courageous, pivot, the role of innovation. And Zulera, you're the first one that put some very practical examples about how companies that you see, enterprises that you see, are doing exactly that. Would you like to just comment on that question from one of our audience?
Sure. Look, I think very quickly, again, this may sound like a very, not too very positive or very optimistic in that sense, but the reality is that not all businesses will survive through crisis, and not all businesses are designed to pivot. We need to understand that. So certain businesses can turn around very quickly, given that they are positioned in a certain way, or they are already in providing a certain service or product, which allows them to pivot very quickly. Unfortunately, for some businesses, it's a dead end, right? But for businesses like that, perhaps it could be an opportunity to relook at the business models. Is there an opportunity to reintroduce a new product? Is there an opportunity to sort of maybe take a step back to look at how you could reinvent the business? Because not all businesses, not all times that you need to reinvent yourselves, but at times there is a pressing need for you to look at your business model. This could be a situation where you could look at that. And again, I think there are also businesses that actually have come to a state where they've actually had to completely shut down operations, and we've seen a number already. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've seen a number of people actually coming up to me and saying that, look, they cannot sustain through this period anymore. So what they've decided to do is take a step back, shut the business down for a while, and think about what they would do. They have to lay off the team and think about what they would do instead of continue to sustain losses. That's the reality of small businesses. Bigger businesses, somehow you'd still find a way to turn around, because financing options are still available for bigger businesses, because you still have assets that you can leverage on, you still have future businesses that you can bank on. But with small businesses, sometimes the situation is really unfortunate. You're at polar opposites of the spectrum. On the one hand, you are agile, you can turn around very quickly. On the other hand, that if you are in the wrong business model, you're not you don't have a business model that can be quickly turned around during a crisis period, you just die. Right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for all. But our message is this: I think in times of crisis, it's always a situation for us to take a step back and really assess, what are the building blocks? If this happens again, how do you sustain through this period? How do you prepare yourself for the next crisis? It may not be COVID, but it could be anything else. It could be a general economic crisis that will hit us again, right? It couldn't not necessarily be a pandemic. Right? How do we deal with crisis moving forward? So yeah, that's generally our message to businesses. Time to relook at the business models, see what's not working and see what's working, right?
Thank you. So we see really clearly that social enterprises represent a critically important actor in this impact ecosystem. And Zulera, thank you, because that actually was a marvelous segue to one question poll we have to round this up. So we'll put that up there. Here's a question for our audience. How can we help social enterprises survive and thrive? What is the most urgent action required? So we've talked about a lot of different actions that we can take. We've talked about very briefly kind of about the bigger picture, the scenario, the scenario around what's happening. We're in a crisis, but what's the number one thing? What would you choose? Those of you who are social enterprises out there, those of you who are not. Someone earlier said the ecosystem around social enterprises is nascent. So that means that the ecosystem around you social enterprises out there, we need to continue to deepen and to become more dynamic and active to help and support you as well. So help us. How do we do that? So take a quick poll. And with that, I would love to, as we finish that up, I want to thank our amazing panelists. Eugenia, thank you. Tristan, thank you. Elizabeth, thank you. Zulera, we can't see your face, but we thank you.
Thank you.
Stephanie from Canberra, thank you so much, all of you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Wen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that just as much as I did. That was such an amazing kickoff to the week. So we wanted just to kind of take stock right here before we go into the networking session, which will be in this room. And so for those who have to leave, I just have a couple of things that just to kind of announce. So the next session is at 12 o'clock today, and it's on the circular economy. So it'll be 12 to 1, and then a networking session again at 1 to 1:30. So hope you can come. I was in this exact dry run for circular economy, and it's going to be amazing. So I hope you can stay on. Spread the word. So tickets are still available. We want everyone to share this so that we really can help the founders and social entrepreneurs and people in the ecosystem to come together. So please spread the word. If you want to connect with anyone at TBNAsia, these are some of the names and our email addresses as well. So with the different pillars that I was talking about earlier, please do get in touch. So this Saturday is what we call Social Enterprise Saturday. We've got 36 social enterprises that will be actually talking about what they do from 9 a.m. to 1:30. And they really range from all different sectors as well. And some of them are really, it's going to be great. So please dial in if you can. It is open to the public, so it's not ticketed. So please spread the word as well. And also the other SEs that are on our app. So please download the app by just putting TBNAsia on Google Play or the Apple Store. So I know we've done 2 polls already, but we really want to get feedback from today's session. So we just want to get feedback from you about the content, whether you would recommend it. And I believe there are only 3 questions. So very quick, 4 questions. So if you can just quickly click through, it will take you no time at all. We just want to keep improving. And that's what we're doing every single session to give you a really great experience coming to this conference. So in the room, I believe most of the panelists can stay. And so what we're going to do is open the chat box now. So our Zoom Tech LJ is going to do that. So you can post the questions on Q&A, and I'm going to read some out now. But feel free to chat to everyone. You can just say, hi, my name's so-and-so, and I'm from this organization, so we know who's in the room as well. There is quite a lot of us in here. There's like 120 of us. So this is really great. We're so glad that so many people turned out for this session. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start reading while the poll's getting done. Thank you. I'm going to start reading one of the questions. Let me just find. Okay. Let me just find. Okay. Now this is a bit of a long one, but I'm going to give it a go. So this is from Cam Len Gek. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Your question is, when addressing SE's needs for interventions, two most popular responses from SEs are immediate operation support and business model pivoting, which we just touched on as well. Since these two interventions have different purpose and maybe timeline, and since resources are scarce, especially now, what do panelists recommend on what to prioritize in order to protect their business? I thought this was quite a good question. Anyone in the panel, please feel free. It's not directed at anyone. Please pipe up.
I think, I mean, the way the question is phrased, the end is in order to protect the business. So if it's about protecting the business, then I would suggest that the aim would be to focus on the long-term adaptation and pivoting strategy, and less on the immediate issues. But of course, I think we find that social entrepreneurs are often the types of people who will want to address a challenge that they see in front of them. So I think that in reality, it's often about trying to find the balance between the two things, which can be really difficult given the resource constraints. I think that the successful organizations will have to find a way to balance both at the same time, and that is a really difficult challenge. There's no question about it.
I want to just hop in here. I think it's very important for people to sometimes, take a step back and look at the whole thing and say, hey, I really need to be educated a little bit more about this new dynamic that is in front of me. So often, we just jump in and try as social enterprises. Let's see if this works. I mean, it's okay if there's plenty of resources for us to try this and to try that, but as we've come to a time now when resources are scarce, money is tight. So I think it's more important that we go and reskill ourselves, and there's plenty of courses online, some of which are free, that you can just jump in and learn some of these new skills before jumping in and starting a brand new enterprise. It may open up your minds, because in an online class, you get to meet other people, and you learn new ideas, and that's how you grow and develop yourself, so that when you go back into your business, you can pivot, or I prefer transform, because Zulera is absolutely right. Some businesses you absolutely cannot pivot anymore, it's dead. So therefore you have to totally transform, throw it away. COVID has destroyed the box. Think out of the box.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Jackie just said, just curious, Elizabeth, there are a lot of courses available as well. In your opinion, what are the new skills you would be suggesting?
Well, e-commerce, for example, we're all stuck, under lockdown. We can't go anywhere. We really need to learn what e-commerce is all about. And we can do that online. I mean, that was why I talked about our Alibaba Get program. And overnight, we have some 1,600 participants who signed on board. And that's where you learn these skills. How do I do it? I hear about e-commerce, but what exactly is it, But it's not just about doing business online. It's about, how to make your business so much more attractive to the people out there. Maybe, the people have changed, their priorities have changed. But, but if we are still stuck in that old dynamic and we're not moving forward, that it's no point, If we think that the Grab food is dirty, for example, we're just gonna starve. So, we need new thinking.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Very quickly to Tristan, when will the Thailand survey be released? This is from Nam1, and I'm assuming they're in Thailand.
Actually, I just like an answer to that question in the chat box, but I'm hoping that it will be ready in the autumn. Where
Right.
if anybody can help us to promote the survey amongst social enterprises in Thailand, we'll be very grateful for your support.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And we're in touch with a couple of incubators there as well. So please, yeah, send through the link and we'll be happy to publicize it. This is a really interesting question. What is your professional opinion on deglobalization as a result of COVID-19? And I guess in relation to social enterprise as well. And this is from Jackie again. Jackie, you've got some really great questions. I'll throw it over to the panelists.
I'll have a stab at that. Not speaking on behalf of the Australian government, but thinking about the way that we think about local ownership of social innovation and entrepreneurs being quite often very closely embedded in their communities. We are definitely seeing that with the travel restrictions and border closures, this model of fly in, fly out development worker, international expert is not working, right? We've had to pull out all of our international aid advisors from many markets, and now they're working from home in Australia. But I'm hoping, like Tristan said, being bold, I hope actually we will realize that there is so much talent and local talent that can be supported and can take up those roles. And so that we're looking on the design of our Pacific Frontier Lab program that, we had thought we would send in a team, we'd have some local people on that team and they would travel all around the islands talking to people and convening. Well, that's not going to happen. So it's on us now to find those excellent people in the markets where we work, skill them up and support them if they don't have the right skills. There are plenty of people who do have the right skills, but just couldn't compete with, other big organizations, and support them to do the work, to do the needs assessment, to do the implementation. And I'm hoping we'll get a better result because they're in the community and they understand the nuances and the context of the communities and the countries in which we work. So I hope, that's a personal opinion, I hope that is a benefit of all of these travel bans. Of course, we all like going on holidays, but yeah, I'll pass it to the rest of the panel.
Is there anybody else on the panel before I jump to the next one?
I'm just wondering what Jackie actually means by deglobalization. I thought the whole idea of globalization was to connect the world more. And now with all the technology and the fact that we can connect so much more, that I'm seeing Stephanie right now, I'm chatting with her all the way from Australia, that I'm not very sure whether we are really deglobalized at all. I mean, we depend so much on the face-to-face, but actually we're face-to-face right now. You know what I mean? It's just that we can't touch each other, but it doesn't matter because we're just connected so seamlessly. So I'm sorry, Jackie, I'm not quite sure what you meant by deglobalization.
Hey guys, thanks for sharing the opinion. Perhaps it's from the perspective of supply chain, because we all heard about how disintegrated is the entire supply chain impacted by COVID-19. So that's perhaps it's my perspective, because I've been reading as well, watching video about how supply chain of big company, for example, if we have like a part that's from China, the whole supply chain is now being disrupted, and there are people talking about supply chain innovation where you have blockchain and all that. So I'm just curious to put this thing out there and to see what you guys have in mind. Just a brainstorm.
I can provide some insights on that. I think from an investing perspective, the supply chain piece is being closely looked at, and that should benefit local businesses definitely, because more and more, even on the investor side, even if you're looking at investing in some of these big companies on the fund houses side, as I said earlier, the social part of ESG, which includes looking at supply chain management, supply chain stability, all of that is becoming of increased interest. And you hear these questions come out all the time. So I think, in the mid to long term, definitely, as we're seeing in the short term, issues around kind of supply chain strength that will come into the spotlight, and it will benefit then the local companies, even though, we do still need globalization, but, the emphasis on bringing some stuff local, strengthening the local supply chains, that will be of importance.
I would just echo that and say that this does potentially present an opportunity for social enterprise who can perhaps fill the gaps in the supply chains as well. Although I think there's also in that sort of period of transformation, there's a big risk of mass unemployment for people, for people, particularly in some of the developing markets in the region, in South Asia particularly. So I think there's a short-term shock, but a longer-term opportunity for local businesses, social enterprises, to play a much bigger role within global supply chains as well.
And actually I think that's a good argument as well for just more creative, some new creative partnerships, because Jackie, talking about deglobalization, maybe it's physical movement. Yeah, like Elizabeth is saying, we're face to face, but we can't physically move. But we know that there needs to be upskilling, or even just identifying who the talent and the skills are in countries already at the ground level. They know the context, they know that the players, they know that the local ecosystems, we know that they're there. Perhaps unique partner, and they have the ability to transform, to pivot, to move, to adapt quickly, because they're small and nimble and they know what's going on and they have the local networks. So perhaps, those small country-based organizations, companies partnering with, the Standard Charters or the larger organizations, perhaps there's an opportunity there as well. Yeah, interesting.
Great, thank you for that. Here's the next one. It is targeted at Zulira, but I'll open that to everyone. Is it a good time to start an SE at this point? And this comes from Ash. Anyone?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, you're clear.
Okay, great. Is it a good time to start an SE? Well, there's no right or wrong answer to it. I think it depends on what is it that you're trying to do? What services? Is there a need for what you're trying to sell at this point? Is there a need for the services that you need that you're looking to put out at this point? I think it's always important, regardless of when you think about starting a business, you need to assess it from a market needs perspective. So if there's a need for what you're doing right now, why not?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs are there to solve problems.
Yes, exactly.
So you need to find the statement, the problem statement. What are you trying to actually solve and contribute towards?
I think it's always a good time to start an SE. The thing is to understand what a social enterprise is. I think it's more important. A lot of people are losing their jobs. They said, oh, well, if I'm going to lose my job, then maybe I should be my own employer. But the thing is, a social enterprise must have a social impact. What you do must benefit society. That's what a social enterprise is. That's what an SE is. And so we have to keep asking ourselves, is what we're doing going to impact society and add to the whole ecosystem? Yeah, at the same time, look for something which is going to sell, you know, because otherwise there's no point. You'll just lose more money. You know what I mean? And coming back to this whole time when money is tight and resources are tight, we need to be a lot more careful. But it's also a good time for us to think about life and to think about what we really want to do in life now. So we've lost our job. It's not the end of the world, but what do we want? What do we want to do? Life is going to be so different in this post-COVID, this new normal. It's totally abnormal to me. But what can I do? I might as well do good. So coming back to SEs.
I love that. I might actually take this and do a shameless plug for a session on Thursday, 5 p.m. So it's called Reframe, and it's actually addressing just what you said, Dr. Lee. Just kind of like, what's your purpose? And really, if going to the social impact space, who you are as an investor, a social entrepreneur funder, someone who wants to get involved, is to really figure out what's your kind of position of help. What can you bring to the table, and trying to figure out your purpose as well. So yeah, so at 5 p.m, if anyone wants to dial in for that, it would be a great session, and it's called Reframe. Now, is there anything, I think what I might do, stop with the questions, but any last parting words, I think, from the panel? If you want to say your one piece, please do it right now, and then we can all log off 10:30 on the dot. So there's 9 minutes between all 5 of you. Okay, Christy has to go. She has a work meeting, so that's fine. Thank you so much, Christy. Okay, so anyone, any order, please go. We'd just love to hear one last piece.
So the parting words for me go back to the idea of ownership, governance, and ensuring that particularly in this time of crisis, social enterprises are really rooted in communities and are owned and governed in the interest of the people to whom they are there to serve. And I think those governance structures are something I would love to see much more emphasis placed upon as we come out of the crisis, because those the emerging evidence that we see shows us that those enterprises are much more resilient, or potentially much more resilient than other types of enterprises. So ownership, governance in the interest of communities. I think if you have businesses that are really rooted in communities and that are governed in the interest of those to whom they are serving, then there's a better chance of building a much more resilient economy overall.
Great, thanks, Tristan. Eugenia?
Yep, sure. So from our end, I would say, while it's true that financing might be tight, but there are pockets still of opportunities for you to tap, especially in the family offices side. So that's a bright spot area, and just ensure that you're able to have clarity of vision and to show clear and measurable outcomes, both in terms of financing and financial sustainability, as well as social impact.
Great, thank you.
So from me, well, we are an educational social enterprise, and our job is to educate, train, and nurture the right kind of skills and thinking to enable social enterprises to thrive. So please just check us out and let us see how we can help you, because I truly believe we really all need to unlearn, relearn, and reskill, learn some new skills, lots of new knowledge to assimilate into our very beings, so that we can truly survive and thrive.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Zilera?
Oh, hi, sorry, I'm trying to unmute it again. So yeah, I think I would really echo what Elizabeth said. I think it makes a lot of sense what she just mentioned. I think it's an opportunity to, unlearn is the right word actually. Forget what you've known. look at things and, you know, try and develop a new perspective of things. I think it applies to us as well. You know, we're looking at our organization from a very different lens, you know, with all of this happening. You know, it's not just about the SEs. We are also thinking about how do we best help them, because the help that's been given in the past may not be able to work moving forward, right? So how do we do it better for everyone? So I guess it's an opportunity for all of us to look at new perspectives of doing businesses. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, I think Stephanie just dropped off, which I didn't get her her last statement, but that's fine. We are 5 minutes early, but I think we've got enough to kind of digest, and yeah, and we really want everyone to come back again at 12 o'clock, a really great session on the circular economy. But again, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for staying on. I really enjoyed the session myself, and I hope everyone did too. Please just feel free. We might just leave the room open just for another 5 minutes. People can just chat in the chat box. I think one of the things we wanted to do at this conference is give that kind of real life, when you're at a conference, you get to meet other people and you get to meet the panelists and just chat because collaboration is key, and we have to get to know each other in the first place to know who's out there, who's doing what. So please just keep chatting away. But I will also let the panelists go because, yeah, if they need to go as well. But so thank you so much. And please join in for all the other sessions. It's going to be a really great week. So from my side, thank you and have a really great day ahead.